Today's guest is known as Silicon Valley's expert in policing, currently works with over 50 local law enforcement agencies across the continent on police reform initiatives. As the CEO and co-founder of Spider Tech, he just recently sold Spider. He created the world's first automated customer service platform for public safety agencies. The company is funded by Alphabet, that is Google parent company, Kairos, and other top funds. Welcome to the show. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm good so much. Thank you so much, Rahul. If I'm pronouncing your name probably correctly, right?
Yes.
Rahul. Thank you so much, Rahul, for making out time to join me today on this episode of Mirror Talk podcast. I really appreciate it because I know you have a lot of tight schedules and a lot of appointments. Thank you so much for making out the time to be on this episode with me. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Yes. I find it really, fascinating that you built your first game at the age of 14. And this is so, I don't know what I was doing at the age of 14, actually. So can you tell me about you growing up, with the main interest in technology and public safety in technology and public safety, and how that has influenced your life journey so far?
Yeah. I mean, look, I like you're saying, building my first game at 14 was my foray into technology at a young age. It was also the only game. I didn't keep building video games back then, but yeah. It was my buddy and I were into pirates and pirate themed games, and so he and I decided we wanted to learn how to basically do a little coding, do a little modeling and skinning into the game, so we could get a sense of what it takes to build something like that. And then we ended up building a team around that experience when we were 14, but we had to lie to everybody on the internet and say that we were 25 so they would be willing to work with us, because it was a volunteer operation. And then one day PC Gamer magazine did a little piece on the game, and everyone found out that we were 14, so everyone just quit. So we never got a chance to fully finish it. But yeah, so that I learned about obviously that's one of those things where when you're a kid, you tinker with things, and I always wanted to tinker with the computer, and not just on the hardware side, but mostly on the software side. I wanted to get a sense of how to make things go. And when you're a kid, you're playing video games. That's one of the easiest ways, I think, to get kids interested. If they're able to kind of mash up their creativity with their ability to their curiosity, their ability to build things. So we were curious about this universe of pirates, and we wanted to put something like that together, and that drove my curiosity into all other things tech. And when I was I grew up, my grandfather was a 4-star general in the Indian Army, and I came from a long line of military, both in the Indian Army and the US Army as well. And that I had a sense of service. My uncle was the mayor of a local city, and it technically still is. And so, I had this line of public service that I've always felt very connected to. And so I kind of combined my love for technology and public service through public safety, because I was still growing up, I always wanted to do exciting jobs. I wanted to be a firefighter. I wanted to be a police officer. I wanted to do these things that I thought would be very exciting for me. So when I turned 18, I started learning how to become an EMT. And then I went to school at University of Pittsburgh and got my bachelor's degree in emergency medicine, and became a paramedic and a crew chief, and started learning the flight medicine side of things. And then, I had a couple experiences as a on the fire rescue paramedic side that led me to want to try being a police officer. So I came back to Los Angeles, where I was born and raised, and became a police officer there for a little while. And then decided, it's time for me to kind of mold together my love for technology and public safety through Spider Tech. And that was a little over 6 years ago.
Wow. That's so beautiful. It's so fascinating, as I said earlier, from the age of 14, developing games, learning how to code and everything. That's so that shows how intelligent and so brilliant that you are. And I find it
don't overstate it, because it's curiosity that I had. Curiosity is, I think, the superpower. The rest of it just kind of comes if you get lucky.
Yeah, which is good, actually. It's good to be curious. With curiosity, you are able to create a lot of things. Like, if you can combine curiosity with creativity, then you can do wonders, I assume. I believe.
Yeah. No, I think so too.
Yes. So I found out that, there was like a story, or there's something that happened, some incident that happened before you became or decided to become a police officer. So can you share this with me? What happened? Why did you decide, to leave paramedics or, to leave that area of your life or that area of your phase of your life to become a police officer in Los Angeles?
Yeah. So look, I was, this is, I think 2011, maybe 2012. I was in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and I was working on duty as a paramedic, the crew chief of my ambulance, and with my EMT, and we were driving back from Children's Hospital after dropping off, a pediatric patient, and we got to, we were driving up the highway on our way to another, 911 call in our area. And one of the things you have to do sometimes when you're driving to a call, if it's not an emergency call, but you're kind of far away, we had to make a U-turn because we were going the wrong way in traffic, and we had to go towards the 911 call. So I turned my lights on to make the turn, which is what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to turn your lights on, and then emerge back into traffic and turn my lights off, and I started heading in that direction. Well, there was a white SUV behind me that didn't like that I turned in front of them. I guess they had somewhere to be. So as we're driving north on the highway, that white SUV, just a nondescript white Ford Explorer, pulls over to the shoulder to look inside the, basically driving on the shoulder of the freeway to look inside the cab of the vehicle to see my face. And then once they do that, they came behind the ambulance and they turned on red and blue lights. There was like an undercover cop or something, and they pulled me over. And the guy, gets out of the car. He's like kind of a short old white dude with no uniform, no gun, nothing like that. And walks up, doesn't show me a badge, but shows me an ID that just says Pittsburgh Police on it or something like that. And he says, Pittsburgh Police. And he says, give me your license, give me your registration. You cut me off in traffic, blah, blah, blah. I apologize. I'm 22 or 23, I think, at the time. So I don't really know much. And so I go, hey, I'm sorry. I give him my stuff. He comes back at me, throws all the stuff at me. He runs back to the car first says he's going to check to see if I'm a real paramedic or not. And I'm in uniform, by the way, in a marked ambulance. He gives me all my stuff and says that he's coming at me with a warrant. And I'm going, warrant for what? But I'm scared that I'm actually in trouble because I thought maybe I did do something wrong. So I get my fire chief on the radio. I say, or EMS chief on the radio. I say, hey, I'm on my way back to the station. Here's what happened. He said, all right, don't worry about it. Just come back. I come back. He says, yeah, the guy called us too and was like angry that he said you cut him off in traffic or something. And, my EMT and I told him what happened. Then he finds out that this guy was the chief of police at the time of Pittsburgh School Police. He has no jurisdiction on the highway. And he goes, okay, this is ridiculous. So he calls and he complains to the city and says, this random guy is over here harassing my paramedics. Well, it turns out that was the last straw for that guy. He ended up getting fired because he had a road rage problem. He was off duty. He had no reason to be doing what he was doing. He gets fired. I have to testify against him in court. And so in court, they ask him, why did you pull him over? And he says, well, he was driving erratically. He turned his lights on and he was kind of cutting through traffic. And he says, they said, that's an ambulance being an ambulance. So what is it about this particular ambulance that made you think this is weird? I should pull this over. He told them in court in front of the press and everybody that the FBI taught him how to racially profile. And he thought I was driving a Taliban war wagon. And he thought that, I was driving an ambulance that was a car bomb disguised as an ambulance, which is absurd, of course. But he takes one look at me. I'm an Indian guy, so he sees me and he goes, "Oh, that's suspicious," and he pulls me over. That's what ended up happening. This is in the news. If you Google it, you can find. I'm sure the articles are still there, and and that blew my mind that was the case. I had a bad taste, obviously, for police officers after that, and I had a couple other incidents that happened on, when I was working as a paramedic that made me kind of frustrated with policing in general. And I remember talking to my chief about it, and he said, you should try being a cop, see if if you feel like those criticisms hold up when you actually do the job. And so I put my money where my mouth is, and I became a cop. And I learned very quickly 95% of what I thought was wrong. I learned how difficult and how different the job was from what I thought it was. And it was a very humbling experience for me, and I'm glad I did it.
Wow. I mean, I'm so sorry to hear about that. It's like, it could be very, very difficult to be in such a situation where you are, a victim of, racial profiling. It's horrible. Yeah. But I think you are also right. You said, from the inside, it looks quite different. Like when you are in the police department already, it's very different from when you are just a normal citizen of the country. And
Right.
I really respect your decision to, really take that bold step to join the police, to make a change in that department. So can you tell me about, the police reform technology? How does, technology really play into this police reform? Because I know it's very, very important, from your experience, for example, and everything that we hear in the news is very important for a kind of reformation to happen in the police department, not just in the US, but in a lot of countries all over the world. So how does that work with the, technology being involved in that?
Well, I mean, policing is like anything else in the sense that technology is deeply rooted into all of its practices, and it drives a lot of what the outcomes that happen. Policing itself is using technology for everything that it does for the most part. So I can't say that our technology is the only thing that is helping establish or modernize policing in any way, but it is one of the ways that policing is being modernized is through that technology. So Spider Tech, what we sought out to do is understand how customer service is, how the consumer expects customer service from every other organization it interacts with on a daily basis. So Amazon, for example, when you buy something from Amazon, you get that email same day. It says, here's what you bought, click here to track your order. Your item is shipped, your item is delivered. And Amazon's going to send you surveys, saying, hey, how is the item? Rate the item and let us know what we can do better about, the item or our service. And it uses that information to better, improve upon its service and understand the liabilities it has on the product side and make better decisions. So we looked at that and we thought, okay, how do we apply that to policing? And, all of this is done automatically through the use of technology, through the data that goes in and out of their point of sale systems for e-commerce websites, for example. Well, those data sets exist within policing. When someone calls 911, that data exists. When someone files a police report, that data exists. When someone gets pulled over, that data exists. Yeah. So how do we automate this customer service process and then get feedback through surveys so these departments have data they didn't previously have on how their employees are doing and the services are being provided, and basically the product that police department is putting out, information that can help improve that product. So that's what we did. We built a system that, for example, it connects with the dispatch, 911 system within these departments and the record systems within these departments. So if you were to call 911 in any of our jurisdictions, the moment you hang up, you're going to get a text that says, hey, thank you for calling. This is what you called about. Here's your 911 call for service number, an officer's on the way, whatever the circumstances are. You're going to keep getting messages throughout your interactions with the police. So, you filed a police report. Here's what you need to send your insurance company. Here's more information. You'll get a message. A detective's been assigned. An arrest has been made. Your case has been sent to the district attorney. And now we're even working with the district attorney. So you'll get a message saying, hey, a court case has been filed, or basically we're doing an arraignment on this date. This is what you need to know. Like that information, it'll hold your hand across the entire process. Mm-hmm. And while it's doing that, it's going to send surveys saying, hey, can you let us know how your interaction was with a police officer, how your interaction was with a dispatcher? And that data goes back to the department immediately so they can make decisions on what to do, if there's disciplinary action or if they need to positively promote good behavior. These are all different things that they're able to do with the data now. So a lot of it is about changing, it's about identifying liabilities, but it's also about changing culture within the organizations. Because ultimately, if the only data you have to determine whether a police officer is doing a good job is performance data or enforcement data, like how many cites are they writing, how many arrests are they making, how many times are they stopping people, that's productivity to them. If that's the only data you have, then that's the kind of officer you're going to get. But if you start measuring how many positive survey responses they got, how many times, people complimented their demeanor and these types of things, then that's the kind of officer you're going to get. Mm-hmm. So by introducing that data set into police departments, you're starting to gamify this, going out there and being nice to the community type approach. Yeah. And you're changing the culture within each one of these agencies that way.
Wow, that's so beautiful. That means with the aid of technology, one is able to, like you said, gamify it, and that way with giving feedbacks and recommendations and reviews, then it improves the service that the police officers offer. Right. Yeah, that's so beautiful. That's so very smart, actually. Yeah, well, that's a very wonderful way of reforming the police department. But are there like some personal things that, like from your experience as a police officer, like what can I, if I were a police officer, what can I do to myself in order to become a good police officer, in order to render a good service to the public?
I think one of the most important attributes, if not the most important attribute that a police officer can have, is empathy. And I don't mean that just in like when I say this to cops, sometimes they'll roll their eyes and think I'm just talking about like being nice.
Yeah.
Which is part of it. Don't get me wrong. Empathizing with your victim of crime just as much as you're empathizing with your offender sometimes is a difficult thing to do. But that's the obvious aspect of empathy that I think is important. But empathy is also it can be a tactical attribute as well. If I'm a police officer and I'm searching a room, a house for a burglar, right? I've got my gun out and I'm going room to room. I'm clearing the house. Empathy is going to help me understand where that person's most likely to be. If I'm trying to empathize with, if I was in this person's shoes trying to hide from me, what doorway am I going to pop out of potentially with a gun? And when you make a decision to enter a room and point your gun somewhere in that room, good empathy will help you point your gun in the direction of where the threat is most likely to appear from, for example. And I know this is like a very violent, example, but I use this extreme example because I'm trying to show just how empathy can be used on both the side of like keeping yourself safe and winning a gunfight just as much as it can be used in ensuring that you're empathizing with the person that you're arresting at the end of the day and trying to get a sense of what got them in this position, treating them with enough respect so that they, because sometimes just treating someone with respect is going to lessen likelihood they're going to resist in the first place. Not every time, but that can happen in the first place too. So, this type of empathy, I think, is very important. If you work on that, the best you can, you're going to be a better cop in a variety of ways. Even as a detective, empathizing is going to help you find the clues you need to solve your cases. So it's definitely an important attribute. Now, one thing I will say is that being empathetic or having, like a lot of emotional intelligence as a police officer is a completely exhausting thing, because as a police officer, you are just being bombarded with as much negativity as a human being can take on a daily basis. You're seeing the worst of humanity often. You're seeing kids being injured or hurt or killed. You're seeing sexual assaults. You're seeing so many things that are going to test your ability to withstand that trauma and, be able to show up the next day and reset yourself. It's very difficult. And then on top of that, everyone hates you. That's what it feels like, in the United States, that you can do your job and do everything the way you're trained and do everything that you feel like is right. And you're still going to be hated by people who just don't understand you. And so every day you weather this storm. And if you're an empathetic individual, it is an exhausting exercise. And so what ends up happening is some people, they have to turn the empathy off. They just have to go, okay, I can't do this. I can't think about it like this, because they won't be able to handle a 30-year career doing this every single day. Policing has a very high rate of suicide compared to other jobs. And some people aren't able to handle it like that. And it's terrible. It's unfortunate. I want to be able to support those people. Or you either turn it off, you just decide I'm never going to do this again. You never think about it. Or you just really struggle the whole time. And you see officers that succumb to addiction. They have marriage problems. They have all kinds of issues that ultimately are the result of absorbing all this trauma day in and day out. So it's a really difficult thing. And it's something that can, if there are little things that society can do to help our police officers as well become what we want them to be, which is highly empathetic, trained, and intelligent beings that are out there and protecting us and doing what we need them to be. But we need to be able to support them as well, because what we ask them to be is not sustainable if we don't give them the support to be that way.
Yes, but in this sounds very, like, it's my first time of hearing about, like it's been very, difficult for the police officers, with all of these insults, like, people eating them, the public eating them, and everything they have to face every day of their life. Is there like some, therapy, things that have been offered, like therapy sections have been offered for free to police officers, to help them on their daily business and every daily challenge that they have?
Yeah, look, there are a lot of great nonprofit organizations out there that are, nationwide. They're doing peer support for police officers, and that means like, another officer, either current or former, is going to pick up the phone if you call the number, just like a suicide hotline,
Mm.
and talk to you about what, how you're feeling. So, but that is, it mimics a suicide hotline in some ways. It doesn't have to be that you're suicidal, but I need to speak with somebody because I'm struggling so much with this particular thing. And I can tell you the phones were off the hook last year. Obviously, it was very difficult. In Los Angeles, for example, there were protests and riots, and officers were waking up every day and going out there and getting, people are trying to injure them and light their cars on fire and do all this stuff. And for weeks and weeks, in some places like Portland, for months and months, in Seattle, it was nonstop. And officers needed that help too. And so we have these peer support networks, sometimes within departments too. Within the departments, there are peer support officers that are assigned to be that support. I don't think that we do a good enough job personally with professional therapy being offered. And in a couple of ways. Number one, some departments institute CISM, critical incident stress management, which is where it's mandatory in some cases to go to therapy. Mm-hmm. After an incident that supervision might determine this is a very traumatic incident. So you have an officer who might go, I don't need therapy because they don't understand the benefits of it. Right. But their sergeant says, too bad, you have to go see this therapist. Mm-hmm. And they're going, oh man. And they're going to go see a therapist, and they're not going to even realize some cases how beneficial that was for them. So mandatory therapy, I think, is one step, but ultimately you want officers to see the benefits of therapy and then have unlimited access to it if they can. And that is an expensive ordeal. And in a world where, where departments are running out of resources, it's just not something they're able to afford.
Yeah. And I believe also maybe if there's like some kind of technology that supports, therapy sessions, for example, or wellness apps designed specifically for police, that could go a long way also, I guess.
Yeah. And I know there are folks that are working on things like that. It's just, at the end of the day, apps like that, they need money, and you either get donations, which, you can hope for, or the city is going to pay for it. And very few cities and police departments have the money to be able to pay for something that they would consider to be a want versus a need like that. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of these departments are struggling to recruit right now. Retention and recruitment is a massive issue in the last 18 months, especially. So when you're down 15 police officers and you're having a hard time responding to 911 calls fast enough, and you're having a hard time, investigating enough cases, you don't have detectives, mm-hmm. It's hard to justify spending money on anything that doesn't fix that particular problem.
That's true. Yes, that's very true. Well, that's there's a lot of work to be done there, I guess, then.
Yeah.
So, but what was it like, traveling around the country and interacting with so many different kinds of police departments? What was that like for you?
I mean, it's been a privilege, to be able to do that. It's to learn so much about how different policing is in different locations. I mean, the size of the department is going to make it different. The location, the leadership within the department, the culture, the history of that department. Mm-hmm. Obviously where you are in the country is going to be different. Policing in the United States is very localist. And I believe that's the way it should be. It is designed to fit the needs of the community that it serves. Mm-hmm. In the US, we have municipalities that, cities basically that govern themselves within states that govern themselves within the United States itself. Right. So there are superseding rules in the state, at the state level, and then at the city level. If I am a city of 50,000, a population of 50,000, and I say, okay, I have a chief of police, that chief of police is going to decide, okay, how do I police this community? What does this community want from me? Some communities might go, look, we're willing to decriminalize these types of things. These are not things that are important to us, but we want you to be more, involved in XYZ instead. Some cities might go, we want to make sure that nobody speeds on our roads, for example. Yeah. We want to have the safest streets in America in terms of traffic. And so that police department might be very heavily invested in traffic laws and what we call motor units, which are the motorcycle cops, and installing red light cameras and doing these things to keep the streets, very safe in that regard. And that community might say, we don't really care as much about narcotics usage and things like that. And so they might not have a big narcotics investigation team, and they might just, at the patrol level, let that stuff go. And that's the decision that community makes. So going to different, major cities like New York and LA and Seattle and learning about policing there, and then going to smaller suburbs and learning about policing there, learning about it from the county sheriff's side or the district attorney side has been just a privilege in the last 6 years to be able to travel the country and learn from everybody. And then, hopefully, do a little teaching as well in terms of what I've learned from other places and disseminate that information so other, communities and other police departments and sheriff's departments can improve their operations by learning, what I've picked up over time too.
Yeah, that's good. And do you think like politics plays some kind of roles in the, the different structures that each police department have? Like, you said, different communities have, kind of, restrictions or, things that they're allowed to happen. Is there like some roles that politics play into that?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's deeply ingrained, in everything. And it's going to be because, ultimately, if you're a police department, you're a police chief, for example, you're hired and fired based on the recommendations of the city council or the mayor, the city manager. I mean, these are all, at least everybody but the city manager, they're all elected officials. Yeah. And they respond directly to the voters. It's a system built like that by design. I'm not saying there's an issue with it, but that is just the way it's designed. So the city council decides to shape the police department how they want to shape the police department. Similarly, if you're a county sheriff, you're elected. So you're reporting directly to the voters. If the county wants to do it, the voters say, I don't like the way the sheriff's doing things, you're going to get voted out. So it's inherently political either way. And it's political in the sense that you can have a city that for 50 years is doing something. And then one day the voters can all change their mind and how they want to do something. And if they put enough pressure on city council will just fire the police chief if they want to. It's an at-will position in most locations. So there's really nothing you can do about that. And then install somebody and say, this is what we want you to do. And we saw this happen a lot last year. I'll give an example. Seattle police, police chief, former chief, I truly respect, is Carmen Best. She was the first female Black police chief in Seattle. And she's been there for a couple of years before everything happened last summer with what happened, the unfortunate events with what happened with George Floyd. She was the chief of police. And when there riots and protests that hit Seattle, she was in charge of the safety and everybody. And she was complaining she did not have the support she needed from city council to do what she needed to do. And she was saying, look, if we want to improve policing, for example, we need more money. If you want us to train cops more, we need more money to train cops more. If you want us to get better cops, we need more money to be able to afford the best cops. I mean, that's the nature of the game. But she was undergoing, the threat of defunding, budget cuts. And she's like, I can't do this job with, we're already struggling to respond to 911 calls. And then thing after thing happened. We had Chaz was the name of this, kind of, I don't know, I forgot what they referred to it as, but it was like this annex part of the city where a group of people just took over a part of the city and said, this is now our part and we're not going to let cops do anything here. And it's just going to be us. There's a lot of pressure on the police chief because there are a lot of people who live there. They're like, we didn't sign up for this. There are businesses who are like, we don't just give stuff to these people for free. They're just taking what they need. Like, we didn't sign up for any of this. And we're like, chief, you need to help us. And the chief, her hands were tied behind her back, and they took over an entire police precinct. Wow. And, she had to find a way to solve this. So she was just getting slammed problem after problem and was not getting the support she needed from the city. And then eventually people found out where she lived in Snohomish County. So they started going to her house and threatening her family and camping outside her house. And she said to the city, I need your help. And they said, they didn't give her the support again. So she just one day said, okay, this is an impossible job. And she resigned. And she was one of the most progressive and I think respected and effective police chiefs in America. And she walked away from that role. And since then, Seattle, they've had massive retention issues, morale issues. They have, it's been a major issue there the city, and crime has obviously gone up, and they're trying to clean it up. They're trying to fix, all the problems that have occurred. But that's an example of, of the politics not supporting a chief who had the right mindset. She came from a background where she could truly empathize with both sides of the fence. And that's who you need in that position. And unfortunately, it just wasn't enough.
Well, that's sad. But I'm sure there are also some cases in which politics also play probably good roles, or positive
Yes, of course.
roles. Yes. But it shows from your story, it shows that the politics, the people in power, have a very, very great impact on the police departments of that community, for example.
Yeah, and look, it's the way that it's designed. It is essentially democracy manifest. I mean, that's what you want, right? You want politicians to be afraid of that they're going to get voted out, that they're going to lose their job if they don't have the votes. And sometimes politicians that helps us and it creates a productive environment. Sometimes it doesn't, depending on the circumstances. And it's a difficult job because you might, if you're a politician, you're trying to solve a problem. There are ways to do it. And the best way to do it is to truly understand what the problem is, to spend the time. It is a patient process, right? And I say this to entrepreneurs as well. You want to understand what is the problem. And there's of course there's a problem with racism in policing. I've experienced it firsthand. And I know that exists. So you have to understand, why does that problem exist? What's happening here? You understand, what is the problem? Why do we have bad police officers? Well, of course we have bad police officers. So understand how that problem works. Taking the time to truly understand that problem for every angle is not, it's going to take some time. And if you're getting bombarded with hate and anger and all that, as a politician, you start getting scared. You start going, oh, okay, I got to do whatever I can to solve this problem. How do you guys want me to solve it? And then at some point, you might fold to a solution that isn't pragmatic. It doesn't necessarily make sense, but it solves for all the phone calls you're getting, every single day. And you go, okay, cool. I've just taken the stress off of me and I've passed the buck to somebody else. And this is going to be someone else's problem down the line. And you get to solve for that. Right. And even at the national level, let's not even think about the city level. The national level, you have term limits in some cases as the president for every 4 years. In some cases, you have to be reelected every 2 years, or you basically have a short period of time. And because the time is that short, you basically have to play this game of what is going to get me reelected. And what did the polling numbers say? And that's what I'm going to do. And that's fine, because technically that's the way democracy has to work, but you're not going to always make the best decisions for America in that circumstance. You're going to make the best decisions for you. You're going to make the decisions on what's going to get you elected. And in some cases, you have to play the game of who are my constituents, who are not my constituents, who are my voters. And I got to cater to my voters and not the people who just aren't going to vote for me because of identity politics. And so you're going to eventually build kind of an imbalance there in terms of what the problems and solutions are. So, I mean, that's the downside of it, but that's the way the system's designed.
Yeah. And with all of this, downsides and upsides, what do you think the future of policing is? What's it going to look like in the next 5 years?
I mean, I think policing is like anything else that is affected by politics, in the sense that it is it's a pendulum that swings. And, I think, when President Obama had always mentioned government as like a very large ship, like a cruise ship, not like a Porsche, but like a cruise ship. And responsible government leaders, they turn the ship, if they wanted to have it change directions, they turn the ship slightly over time, so that if they turn it too fast, the ship will topple. And I remember it was actually President Obama talked about this in an episode of comedians getting coffee in cars or whatever like show is with Jerry Seinfeld. That always resonated with me, because when you have a massive organization like this, you have to make these changes thoughtfully and over time. But we as people are so impatient. Like, we want everything to change right now, or we're going to be furious. And so policing is not immune to that. And what, in some communities, we've had massive changes that have created more problems than they've solved. Right. So that pendulum is going to have in those communities is going to swing a little bit. And there are communities that haven't made any changes, and more pressure is going to build up, and that pendulum is going to swing in the opposite direction as well. So I think there's a local effect that's going to happen in some cities that are going to have to kind of make up for, departments that might have been gutted, or maybe a lack of attention to crime. And people are going to go, okay, actually now we're we're really concerned about this particular issue. We're seeing that happen in cities like San Francisco, for example. But I do believe that overall, the future of policing is going to have to progress towards generally a more accountable and transparent and trustworthy process. I don't think there's a way around that. We're not going to go backwards, even if in those communities where crime has gone up and there aren't enough resources or police officers to do the job. Even in those communities, the ultimate like snapshot of policing in those communities in 10, 20 years is going to have to be more accountable, transparent, because even if the communities go, okay, we're going to refund these agencies, or we're going to ensure they have the resources, we're going to try and help with the recruitment problem, they're not going to go backwards. It's not the way that we are built. And I believe that as consumers, just outside of policing, we have an expectation of service that has been built over the last 15, 20 years from companies like Amazon and Domino's and Uber, of accountability and transparency and ease and communication, that we're just going to have that expectation is only going to increase over time. And we're going to have to, organizations like policing are going to have to match that expectation. They're going to have to catch up, which is why Spider Tech itself exists, is to help them catch up to that, so they can be more transparent at that individual level. They can be more accountable at that individual level, more communicative at that individual level, because the interactions themselves are what I believe are ground zero for these improvements and declines in public perception for policing. So it's just a game of catch up that's going to happen. And even though some of these local jurisdictions are going to play maybe a more severe game of pendulum, it's going to happen for every agency across America.
Wow. I mean, this with the combination of Spider sounds very promising for someone out there who wants to become a police officer or wants to join the police force. So from your own experience, how would you advise this person to prepare his or herself mentally, physically, before, joining the police force? Or what should the person, be expecting or be looking out for?
That's a good question. I mean, I think you have to want to do this job for very specific reasons. You're not, if you want to do the job because, you want to be adored, it's not going to happen. Right. If you want to do the job because you just really enjoy doing, if you're like, it's someone who just really enjoys violence or really wants to find an outlet for their anger, like, you're not going to last, and you shouldn't, right? That's not who should be in the job. If you want to do this job for the money, it's definitely not going to happen for you either. If you want to do this job because you want to help everybody, which is great, but you don't have the capacity to deal with it when you're not able to help someone, then the job's not going to be for you. And so I encourage people to understand what this job is. What the job is you're going to be given opportunities every day to help people. Sometimes you're not going to be able to do it. Sometimes you are. You have to be okay with the moments where you can make a difference, and you have to be okay with the moments where you weren't able to do so. The moments where you might have lost somebody, for example, or the moments where you might have done something that you didn't, that you're like, look, this isn't what I wanted to do, but you have to uphold the law in some circumstances. And that's an uncomfortable truth that you have to deal with too. I mean, you're never going to agree with every decision that you're forced to make by law. And you have to be okay with that. You have to be okay with the fact that you can't be someone who just thrives off of being treated as a hero, because you're rarely going to be treated as a hero. And you have to be okay with that. You have to be okay with making progress for society in the shadows. You have to be okay with it not being a job that you show up for because of the paycheck, because that paycheck, the average salary in the United States is less than $50,000 for police officers. I think it's $43,000 a year. It's not a position that is paid particularly well in most places in the country. And generally speaking, you like, the exciting parts of the job are, it's going to be different every time you show up. It's not a desk job for most people. That is an exciting thing. So you have to be like anything. You have to be motivated for the right reasons to show up. And if you are, then you're going to have a very long and fulfilled and happy career. And if you aren't, then you're going to get into this job and you're going to set yourself up for failure. And it's like when I try and hire people at Spider Tech, I want to get a sense of what makes them tick. Why do they want to come to Spider Tech? Because ultimately, if they're coming just for the money, then at some point another company might offer them more money, right? Yes. And if they're coming just as a stepping stone, then I have to be okay with the fact this person's only going to be here for a short period of time. And that's an internship or something like that. That's okay. But if they're coming because they want to make a great impact in policing and usher in the area of the future of policing, that's the person I want, because I know that person's here for the right reason. So policing by itself is not immune to that type of hiring process. That's who you want.
Yeah. That's so useful actually, like for hiring, and that's yeah. So so far I've been able to learn from you about police reformation, and also the influence and the importance of spider tech to this police reformation. But can you tell me more about spider tech? Like, what do you do there? What is the the core value, the core assignment of spider tech?
What do I do at Spider Tech personally?
Yes, and also
I hire smart people and I get out of the way. That's typically what I do. I mean, look, I'd say after the acquisition, my role hasn't changed tremendously. I'm still, as captain of the ship. My goal is to ensure that everybody knows what their role is within the company. We're hiring the right people. They know what their role is, and we're enabling them to do what we're asking them to do, and we're stepping out of the way. I think that is an effective strategy when it comes to management that we try to incorporate the best we can. The other side of what I do is obviously I'm very much I try to be a proponent for my team members. Now that we're acquired, I have a team within a team, right? So I try to ensure that my team is taken care of the best it can. And the other aspect of it, someone who's connecting with both the customers and the company, like I try to be a liaison in a lot of ways. I try to go out there and spend as much time with my customers as I can to learn about what we can be doing better and how to change that. And even on the sales side, I'm a spokesperson, so I go out there and I speak on behalf of the company, and that's also a big part of my role. But ultimately, I'd say those are some of the larger aspects of my role. But that role has grown over time. I was CEO of a company that had a company of one, and it was me, and then my two co-founders, and we started. So it was us, and then I was taking care of my co-founders, and the role changed over time. And I remember there was a moment where I had to go from being kind of a micromanager of this is my vision and making sure everybody was like, I was slamming it in everybody every day about this is what we need to do, this is what we need to do. My co-founders, leadership said, hey, you're going to have to delegate. You're going to have to be okay with people doing this and trust them to do what you're asking them to do. Yeah. And that was a hard pill for me to swallow at the time. This is maybe 3-4 years ago. But once I did, I was able to breathe easy, and it was the right decision to make. And now I've completely changed into that type of role. And I think every CEO at some point is going to have to do that as the company gets bigger.
Yes. And how was it like, building this business, like making it so profitable and scalable, especially in the technology space?
How we did it?
Yes. Can you give me some inside tips and inside, scope
Sure.
into how you built the business?
Well, look, I mean, you build it the same way you eat an elephant, one bite at a time, one brick at a time. When you build a house, you have to kind of understand what the challenge is. It's like short-term goals. I think it's building upon short-term goals with a long-term vision is the name of the game. So in the beginning of the company, our goal was to understand, that's it. Listen and understand what it is that our product needs to be doing to fulfill our value proposition. And, the success at that moment was coming up, it was product market fit, essentially coming up with something that customers went, this is worth the money. This is what you're helping us actually do what you're saying that you want to do. And, that was the goal. So getting a couple paying customers, and then eventually getting more paying customers to a point where like, okay, this value proposition is resonating across different parts of the market, and we now feel like we have product market fit. Then it came down to, okay, how do we scale this to the next step? How do you go from like 1 customer to 10 to 100 customers? And then building short-term goals around achieving that level of scalability. But what it takes to get to 10 is not the same as what it takes to get to 100 is not the same as what it takes to get to 1,000. Sure. So doing this over time and paying attention to the unit economics, meaning understanding, what our customer acquisition cost was, how much it was costing to maintain, what our margins were, like any other SaaS business, having a respect and healthy appetite for making improvements on that over time and building upon these short-term goals. Eventually you find yourself, you're like, okay, we have a few million in ARR now. And we're if we want to go for profitability, we can make a couple of tweaks and be a profitable business. If we want to go for how much can we grow, then we can take on more venture funding and continue to grow within the levers that we know are working until we have another scalability event where we're going, okay, how do we get to this next level? That's how you build these businesses. It's just understanding how to get from 1 to 10 to 100 to 1,000, and deciding at what point you want to kind of change to maybe keep going for growth or start thinking more about profitability. And that's usually a much later stage decision that you make in a business, but that's how we did it.
Wow. This is very useful for a lot of people that listen to this podcast, because a lot of people are entrepreneurs or people that are looking forward to, starting a business, small scale or big scale. So this is actually, very useful for me also, like setting those short-term goals, long-term goals, and just going at it. And I love your illustration. Like, how do you eat an elephant? You take one bite at a time till the whole elephant is eaten up.
Yeah, that's it.
Yes. So, but from your experience, can you share some of your high and lows, like working as a CEO? What are like the advantages or disadvantages, the high moments you've had, the low moments you had to experience?
Well, I will say one of the lowest moments we had was shortly before one of the highest moments that I had as CEO. We were raising our around $2.5 million round, like early on in the company. And we were running out of money. And I remember, I'd been fundraising for like 4 or 5 months and I was just exhausted. And I was thinking this might not happen. We weren't getting, like we had a little bit of money, but we just didn't have enough to close the round. And we were trying to make it work. And I remember I was talking to Sidewalk Labs, which is Alphabet, Google's Alphabet. Yes. It's like their GovTech arm. And, they were like one of our last shots. Like if we can get them in, we can make this work. And I remember waking up in the morning and I got an email from them that said, "Hey, we've come to a decision and happy to jump on a call and give you some feedback." That was the word they used, feedback. And feedback is what you want to give someone if you're trying to tell them how to do better. And I thought, okay, they're going to pass. They're going to say no. That's what they mean by, we can jump on a call in a couple of days and give you feedback. No sense of urgency. I was like, this is going to be a pass. So I sent them an email. I said, "Hey, can we talk right now? Let's just rip this." I was so frustrated. Let's rip this Band-Aid off. That was my low. That's when I thought it's not going to work. We're going to have to find a way to wind things down. We're going to have to do something else. This isn't going to happen. And they said, "Okay, sure. We'll call you." And they called me and I'm like, "All right, so just hit me with it." And they said, "Yeah, okay, we're going to give you a check and it's going to be for this much money." And I'm like, "What?" Wow. Like, yeah. And I'm like, "You guys understand, you shouldn't use the word feedback because it's just, I'm thinking it's going to be a no." Like, "Oh, we're so sorry." Yeah, good point. And I was, all of a sudden we realized we're like a Alphabet backed company now. Like that's a major step for all of us. And that was a high. And I remember calling Mandy, or I was either calling my co-founder Elon or Mandy, one of the two. And I think it was Mandy. And I called and I said, "Hey, guess what? This is what happened." And Elon and Mandy were staying at a hotel somewhere. And she ran to, for a conference, she ran to his room and knocked on the door and said, "We're an Alphabet backed company." And then we were just so excited. And that was one of the biggest highs. So one of the biggest lows and biggest highs was within 30 minutes of each other.
Wow. That means you should not give up. Once you're experiencing a low moment, and high moment is coming up very soon.
Right.
Yes. So as a last question, or second to last question, I would love to ask, like, if you could advise a 14-year-old out there like yourself back then, who is very interested in technology, interested in being creative, interested in making changes in the world, maybe not in policing, for example, like you are doing, but maybe in other aspects or areas of life. What advice or what kind of information will you give to such a person?
I think that, look, there are a lot of things that I think make a good entrepreneur. One of the things, if I was just picking one piece of advice, it would be, if there's a problem that you want to solve, you need to fall in love with the problem, not the solution. I think that's what drives a lot of entrepreneurs in the wrong direction. When they fall in love with their particular solution and they're not able to pivot, they lose sight of the problem and they end up losing. And that's not what you want. You want to fall in love with the problem so much that you're willing to walk into the office and go, "Okay, we've been doing this the wrong way," and make a change. Now, ultimately, you're going to get pretty ingrained into a solution, but even the late stage companies will die out over time. Blockbuster is an example of falling in love with a solution. People want media. Like they want to be able to watch movies and in a convenient way. And that was the problem that they were trying to solve with Blockbuster. And they were like, no. People are always going to want to come in and rent and go through the experience of going through a video store. That was the solution. And they fell in love with that solution. They're like, no, this is how it's always going to be. And it wasn't. And they lost. And by the time they realized they lost, they'd already lost. You know what I mean? Like that's the way it goes. So fall in love with the solution. Fall in love with the problem, not the solution, and it'll keep you agile.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Fall in love with the problem and not the solution. And
it'll also help you get to product market fit much faster.
And that keeps you, yeah, exactly. It helps you to evolve over time too. Yeah. Right. Wow. So thank you so much for everything I've been able to learn from you today. But what's like the best way to connect and work with you for someone out there who's interested in getting across to Rahul to learn more from you? What's the best way to do
that? Look, hit me up on Twitter.
On Twitter.
My Twitter handle is RAHOOL SIDOO. I'm sure you can put in the description there. It's Rahul Sidhu, but it's spelled phonetically, and we'll chat.
Awesome. So I'm going to place all of your information in the show notes of this episode, and I encourage everyone to, get across to you, maybe ask more questions that we are not able to cover in this space of time for this episode. I really appreciate everything I've been able to learn from you. I appreciate everything that you're doing for the police department in terms of reformation. Hopefully you would extend it from the US and extend it to other countries of the world also, especially maybe Africa, for example, Nigeria. So that would be so awesome. Yeah. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me on.